Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aspect Reacts here on the Aspect Network. I'm one of your hosts, Sean Hussey, and joining me to discuss the latest and greatest in entertainment is Alex Batts. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to dive into things this week. We've got another fantastic episode. So let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to be opening by discussing our overall thoughts on the second episode of The Penguin. So, Sean, what did you think of Inside Man?
Yeah, what a way to continue the momentum off of the pilot, right? I wasn't really sure if we were going to be dealing with something and what direction the show wanted to take moving forward, after starting out so strong and, HBO making that decision to not compete with the Emmys and essentially do like a 10-day release window between episodes and like seeing if the momentum was going to be able to stick around. And I have to say it certainly did. I feel like, and we'll talk about it, but I thought this episode was even stronger than the pilot. I think I enjoyed this one even a little bit more. And really seeing the progression of the characters here as we're starting to get to know them a little bit more and setting up the seeds for what's to come this season is really what's so strong about really excellent television. Is what I kept thinking about as I'm watching this is as we were setting up different threads with either Oz or Sophia or Vic or just his mother, like every character we're dealing with, whether from the Maronis, the Maronis to the Falcones, like
Mhm.
just continuing to do what you do when you make excellent TV, which is just start to lay all of these narrative threads that are going to pay off as we continue through. And for me, starting off with that opening in, Sophia and understanding a little bit more of like where her headspace is and starting to really dive into her character that we see throughout this episode is really strong. There's just so much more that we need to go through with her character, and then continuing to see Oz's progression and really allow him to sort of show his stuff this episode. I think that he was certainly a little less goofy, even though obviously like that's going to be a continued character trait of his is,
Mhm.
no matter how hard he tries, he's probably going to screw some stuff up. And I think that's sort of inherent to the Penguin as a character, but it's going to be really interesting to see how that progresses and if he leans more into that and it costs him in the end, or if he just really starts to get it together and like that's how he rises to be sort of the king of this mafia. But really impressed just overall with the way that they executed the plot here, being able to progress strongly through with sort of everything circling around the drop, and then obviously the funeral and playing all those narrative threads together. A lot of introductions to some great characters. But I don't want to take up all the talking points, so I'll give it to you.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it really as like an umbrella term. Like it does. The show continues to do what I thought was a major upside of the premiere, and that even within the episodes, like you're saying, you are getting so many narrative like payoffs, even if it's just like smaller things. But then, as you were saying, you can tell and you can feel that the larger ideas and the larger character arcs and the stories are going to have that payoff because you can see it within the individual episodes itself, and then this episode even having things that were established in the last episode like getting paid off. And it's just, yeah, it's just really strong writing and getting to dive into the characters more. Like, we'll obviously talk about it, but I can't believe I'm feeling like sympathy obviously, but feeling bad for someone who I'm like, oh, you straight up murdered 7 people and are like clearly not okay. But I'm like, oh man, I feel so bad for her, she's being bullied right now, kind of. Right, it's like the weird, like, how are you able to do
Yeah.
that, right? And so the fact that the show can get that across, I think, is really impressive, and just really, it does a really good job of doing honestly what the Batman does, and being able to like put you in the point of view of these characters, follow these characters around, and just that in itself, like that's an empathy machine. If you're able to spend time with someone and experience something the way that they are, like if you can get that across to your audience, it's going to create understanding and it's going to create empathy. That doesn't necessarily mean that you then agree with the character or like the character. That's where you get all of the dramatic tension in that, and you get the internal moral conflict that I was just having, right? Where you're like, how am I feeling so bad for this person? Why am I rooting for this person despite the terrible actions that I know they've done and are going to do? And so I think it's just a huge strength of this show to continue doing that and to continue showing that. I know that was one of the points they talked about in the like after the episode thing going into it, where like it is about peeling back the layers of the characters and seeing things from their point of view, and getting the audience there. And so I think that's definitely the strongest point of the show so far. Yeah, I think that it's also just super impressive that the show is able to be so engaging, and just, I mean, it's just conversations for most of the show. Like, we have a, heist gone wrong kind of thing happening in the beginning of the episode, but besides that, like, big action, it's a lot of just conversations, and it's just so engaging. The performances are also so magnetic and powerful, and it's just, yeah, I'm glued to the screen the whole time. Like, I didn't stop and check, to see how much time was left in the episode, or my phone or anything like that. Just continuously invested in it, which I think says a lot. And yeah, it's just cool to see them exploring it more. Also, just on the overall thing, I know it's been a big conversation piece recently that I've seen online about whatever superhero or comic book things being like afraid of mythologies, or I know a lot of people will take the Oz Cobb change and say that's them being afraid of the comic book side of things. But I think that if you say that, you're not really watching the show or the movie, because these things are just packed full of love for the comics and what they're adapting, what they came from. Like, I straight up take a shot every time there's a name reference to a Batman creator or someone else who was involved in the comics, where it's like, oh, the Sprang, I think it was the Sprang River is what they said, or like going down Robinson, or all of these other things, and it's just lifting straight from that. And so those things are just cool to see. Like, I always geek out a little bit whenever they name drop something like that. And it's not something that's like overtly in your face or anything either, but it's just a cool one. It helps the world feel alive because it's the characters naturally talking about the world they live in, but then also it's just a cool thing where they all are pulling from these references and things like that. I'm pretty sure the Blue Heron is also something. I can't remember what it's from exactly, but whenever Oz said that, whenever he was retelling that story, like, it sounded super familiar in the back of my head. For some reason, I keep on thinking it's from Mystery of the Batwoman, the like animated movie from the mid 2000s, which, like, super underrated animated Batman movie, by the way. Great pull. But it's probably not even what that thing is from. But that's for some reason what I my brain kept going to. Um, but yeah, I think it was a great episode. I don't know really which one I would say I enjoyed more, but just to have another one at least as strong as the first one, if not stronger, I think is a fantastic trend for this show. So I'm very
Yeah.
much hoping that can continue.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on so many things that I think are worth talking about, and we'll dive into things more specifically as we push into the next segment. But in terms of overall stuff as well, just continuing to be impressed with the things that they're setting up and the way they're executing on them, even from Oz sharing the story about his mother, and you're getting some of the feedback from or just some of the drops about drops.
Yeah.
You're getting some of the narrative drops about, what maybe happened to his brothers, which we talked about last episode,
Yeah.
and we're not really
Uh-huh.
sure like what's going on there. And then like you're
They
paying
died
that
at the
off.
same time,
Yeah,
seemingly,
it
though,
sounds
is
like
what it
it.
sounds like.
Yeah. So some stuff's going on there. We're gonna find out. Um, and then paying that off even with like the last line of like they're in the tomb, and it's like let's dance, like and
Mhm.
they're
Right,
they're
yeah.
in business
It's
together.
so
It's a little
good.
like never more than 12. It's not
Right.
as satisfying, but certainly has certainly has
But
that
it's that kind,
energy
like,
to
as
it.
soon as as that, I mentioned that I wasn't checking times and stuff, but as soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh, that's the episode." Obviously, because like, that's, of course, what you end the episode on. Like, it's perfect.
And so, there's some of that I think is really interesting. And, you know, surely what it's going to come back to bite Oz too is like the world thinks his mother's dead, like is another tidbit that
Yeah.
he like got out
Okay.
of that, like
So
I got
I
out of that
also
conversation.
so I did think about that immediately, because I was like, "Oh, well, that's obviously not true." But then I also thought about the fact that he might be meaning that. I do think that the world probably does think that she's dead, but I think he personally might be reflecting of that, about the fact that she's not, because of her dementia. Like, he can't in a meaningful way ask her about that for a couple of
Hmm.
years now. Is one of the readings I maybe took from that.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah,
I don't know
like
if I
about
agree with you, but I
I
hear
mean,
you.
yeah, I don't know, but, like, it is definitely gonna be, I think, a problem, that because I definitely immediately was like, "No, she's definitely not dead, though."
Oh yeah, and Sophia's definitely gonna get her hands on his mother at some point, and like that's
Oh,
gonna be a
yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
And so all of that is just so well done, and continuing to play with Johnny Vitti and Michael Kelly's doing such a great job with that character, and we got payoff
Mhm.
I guess we haven't gotten the payoff yet, but we've gotten the explanation as to
Further,
why those photos were in the vault and like what that
yeah.
means, and continuing to build upon this crime family and these characters. And I think we'll just kind of start diving it all back in when we return, because we're going to discuss some of our favorite moments from the episode, and we'll be right back.
Hey, Aspect listener, I'm Kate.
And I'm Alex, enjoying this show here on the Aspect Network.
Then check out Bending the Narrative.
We're your one-stop shop for all things Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Each week, we break down an episode from the series and discuss our favorite moments, with a particular focus on the characters and narrative threads that tie the series together.
In addition to discussing the original series, we're also tackling things from The Legend of Korra to the novels and the comics as well.
Now join us as we travel into the world of Team Avatar and discuss one of the greatest animated series of all time on Bending the Narrative here on the Aspect Network.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. Before the break, we discussed our overall thoughts on episode 2 of The Penguin, Inside Man. Now we want to dive into some of our favorite moments from tonight's episode. Alex, where do you want to start?
Oh, that's tough. The whole episode is just so good. Probably, I guess, slight cop out here at the beginning, not the straight up opening scene with Sophia, as you talked about, but the little action that we got, the FEMA like heist and that going wrong. I think that sequence is a really perfect representation and encapsulation of how Oz works and how he's able to survive. He has a plan that would have gone swimmingly for him if everyone did what they were supposed to, but of course that's not what happens. And so it's really interesting to immediately like know how this is supposed to go, because we as the audience get this set up, and then seeing how, knowing that that things are not going to go well, and seeing how he's got to adapt to that and the choices that he makes in the moment, and just how quickly he's able to do that, how quickly he assesses the situation and then makes a decisive action about it. I think, like you were saying earlier, it is a big character trait of his that he is going to mess things up. But I think that his stronger character trait is that regardless of him or other people messing things up and kind of getting in the way, he somehow still manages to make it out of that. And we see that in this sequence, but then also throughout the episode is kind of him doing that over and over. And he was doing it in the premiere too, but I think that sequence is a really good way to start the episode, and also just does so much for furthering his character and showing his character. And it's just also a really well done sequence. It's great. The action's cool. Not that it's like the most showy, but it's a very like immediate, just in your face. Like you feel the impact of it. And yeah, just seeing him adapt in that, I think, was really really cool. And then also the setup and like, again, just continued payoff of like, I'm completely blanking on his name now, but the guy that he ends up setting up at the end, who
Oh,
he plants the knife
Costello.
on. Yeah, Costello. Like
Oh wait, no,
his
no, the guy in the bed.
no Costello, the Falcone guy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
because like he's the one who was torturing him at the first episode, right? And then he's like, "Hey, we're good," right at the beginning of this one. It's like, yeah, and like seeing that their back and forth through the whole episode is good, and then you get to the final payoff of that at the very end, where it's like he's the one who has to end up being killed. And so just having that emotional, I don't know, attachment, kind of like, it's the show does such a good job with all of the characters of like building a rapport and just establishing them as people, that you're like, even if you can't recall everyone's name, you're like, oh, it's that guy, he did, and you have a thing that you can remember and think of, that like, oh, this guy did this and it was important because of whatever reason. And so I think he's a good example of the show doing that just with everyone that you see, really. There's no wasted time or space, which I think is awesome. But yeah, I think that sequence is probably maybe the highlight of the, I don't know, the whole thing's so good. Like it's all great. What was one of the standout moments for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much. Learning more about Sophia as we go along will certainly happen, and she's going to get her episode somewhere along the way, or like it's really going to dive into what she's up to. And that moment with her and her cousin and the little girl, like the daughter, was super chilling. And like,
Yeah,
just continuing, like Kristen Milioti is just like killing
unreal.
this role,
Yeah,
like
dude, it's
ridiculously killing
yeah.
this role. And like this idea that you're learning segments and sequences and tidbits about her as it goes along, of like, we knew she was a serial killer. I think this episode we learned that, there were 7 victims that
They were
confirmed. We
all
learned that they're
women too.
women. And then
Well, yeah,
like I have a funny feeling, kind of based on the way that like that sequence went down that I was talking about with her cousin and her daughter, is like they were probably young women. Because the cousin certainly didn't seem as
Threatened.
concerned and threatened, yeah, exactly, until her daughter came. And some of that can be just like, well,
Just
I'm a
like
mother and this is
parental.
my
Yeah.
daughter, and like parental protection. But also it was definitely played in a way that I was like, okay, like, you know, what age were these girls that she was going after? And, I
Hmm.
think that the show is already, and I don't want to like speculate too much because we have a whole segment for that later, but the show is playing so much with the idea of like Oz and his relationships with, you know, these cam girls and these entertainers, and, obviously his love interest, and like, just based on like what we see in TV and fiction and sometimes real life and in true crime, is like, you know, uh, cam girls and women in that industry can be targets for killers, both fictionally and in real life. And so, there's that line that Oz's love interest, who now I can't remember her name, it's as Eve.
Eve.
I
Yeah.
have, I have it
Eve.
on the I have it on the cheat sheet, but Eve talks about, she's like, I gotta look out for my girls, and it's like Sophia's in town, and like she can't have, so like, was
Yeah.
Sophia targeting like women in the entertainment space that like used to hang around Falcone's clubs? Like, there are so many little threads and things that are being set up that you could easily pay off and interweave and connect, that I think would be really really strong. And I'm really excited to see what happens there with that. The entire truck chase sequence was really cool. I actually, I certainly found it insightful last episode, but the Inside Gotham, sort of tidbit at the end
Hmm.
definitely was more insightful to me this episode. Like the way that they're able to break down those sequences of like Oz needing to make that decision between the Falcones and the Maronis in that moment, and like having to
Hmm.
adapt on the fly, which you alluded to earlier. And even some of the filmmaking stuff of like the camera flashes that they put on the muzzles of the fake guns was really
Those are
exciting
pretty
and
cool.
interesting to me. I was like,
Yeah.
this
I
is
was
a
like,
really
oh,
cool
that's nice.
filmmaking thing. Um, and so just continuing to, understand what's kind of working off in that space, and, you know, learning about what happened in that sequence, and how it came to be is cool. And, obviously when you're working in a TV budget, you don't have the ability to always go that hard with your action sequences, but they did a really nice job of making this one feel, really strong for the episode. And, as they said in the sort of behind the scenes segment, you know, there's more to come, and they want to kind of set the stage for what's happening here. And, I think that, Lauren LaFranc is doing a really nice job of like kind of building her own world and voice in this universe that Matt Reeves has created. And, really glad to see that she's going to get the spotlight here for this. And was great to see Matt Reeves last week in the behind the scenes thing. And I don't know how much more we're going to see of him as we push through, because, this is Lauren LaFranc's show, and she's, really hitting it on all cylinders with her writers' room and her directors. And, the cast obviously is doing a great job. And there's so many different moments you could definitely pick out from.
Yeah. I think one thing from what you said that reminded me that I wanted to be sure to hit is the sequence with Sophia and her cousin. Really, that sequence, and then also just in general at the memorial. The sound design in the show is exceptional. Like all of the background and ambient noise and the voiceover that you'll hear at times, and the voices coming through in particular, like it's just so well done. It really adds a lot to the mood and the narrative of the scenes. Honestly, like you get so much narrative from that. And so I think that was really impressive. But yeah, I mean, Lauren is just doing a fantastic job. I do agree that I think the inside the episode thing for this one gave, not that the first one didn't, but yeah, like more insight into the episode and kind of what's going on here. I also love how much Oz is just completely playing both sides, and he's
Sure.
not that he's doing a bad job of it, but he's doing like not the best
Yeah.
job of it. Like things keep on going wrong. I also do really love Maroni's wife, who I cannot remember her name, but I know she's also in Arcane. Recognize her voice instantly, and a lot of other stuff too. She was in Assassin's Creed also.
Yeah, she's in
Mm.
Destiny. Her name's like, it's like show. I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher this. It's Shorey
Mhm.
Agdashlo. Agdashlu. She's
Iconic voice.
awesome. I'll get that right. Yeah.
she was great. But yeah, seeing again just Oz like be able to adapt instantly, and he kind of also this episode does literalize that or straight up say that in through Oz at the end whenever he's talking to Victor and he's like, it's about how you're able to adapt in these moments. Like you have to think quick, you have to be able to make these decisions. Like that's what this is all about. There's no playbook for it. Like we're all flying by the seat of our pants, basically, is what that like little pep talk was. And I think it's true, and I think that you see it, right? And it was a really obviously messed up moment whenever Oz is forcing Victor into the grave, but it's a very genuine thing where he's like, "Hey, like these two people are dead directly because of something you, in this case, didn't do," and I think that's a really grave wake up call for him. That's like, this is. I hesitated for a second. I was like, "I'm gonna do this." Yeah, um,
Yeah.
but no, I think that that's a really good encapsulation of it as well. I also thought
Yeah.
I was gonna say
Go ahead.
the light thing at the very beginning of the episode for Sophia was
Oh
so
yeah.
interesting, and
Oh yeah. We're about I was about to jump in on this actually. Um, so I was gonna mention like we got introduced to Theo Rossi's character.
that's his
We
name.
talked a little bit about just like we just came playing Julian Rush. Who I don't know if he's a character
Okay,
from the
so
comics or not.
Julian Rush, no, Julian Day is Calendar Man, and I definitely was like, maybe Day is I don't know, probably not, but we'll see. They've been changing names in this,
Maybe.
so you know.
Yeah. But obviously, like we talked a little bit about him last week. He wasn't in the episode. We knew that he was coming. Obviously, a really great character actor who's been in a bunch of stuff, including like Luke Cage, which he was really good in. And so what's going on with him and Sophia is really interesting. Obviously, he was really instrumental in her sort of rehabilitation and release from
Mhm.
Arkham. Also, the way that he seems to be trying to mitigate her, psychotic behavior and her I don't know, actions is really interesting. You mentioned this red flashing light. It almost feels more like a trigger.
Mhm.
I don't trust this
Yeah,
guy like
that's why
at
I also
all.
was like, I feel because if he's Julian Day, the way that it goes down in The Long Halloween and Dark Victory is, if I'm remembering correctly, there is some correlation between Julian and Sophia and the murders and stuff that are happening, and so I feel
Oh, so he's like really featured in like the Long
Calendar
Halloween.
Man? Yeah, yeah, he's a
Yeah.
recurring.
Oh, this is definitely Calendar Man. This
I
is
just convinced you, full stop.
I mean, we know that Reeves and these guys are suckers for the
Yeah,
Long
I mean, it's
Halloween.
like
So,
every person is, which I mean, yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's why I immediately was like, "Is this Calendar Man?" Because like I could see them doing a different angle, with him there, and that kind of because he is obviously like very pivotal in her character and what's been going on with her.
yeah.
So yeah.
At the very least, it sounds like he's some sort of adaptation of Calendar Man and Sophia's relationship from the Long Halloween. Whether he's playing Calendar Man or not,
Mhm.
like that relationship seems to be something that they brought through. And this is why you're on the
Yeah.
podcast.
I
'Cause
also
I didn't know
I might
anything
be
about this.
overstating how entwined that relationship. I haven't read them in a little bit, but I do remember there being something there.
Okay.
So
We trust the
yeah.
process. And then, speaking a little bit on Vic, showcased somewhat, continued to be teased for the
Mhm.
future. I feel as like next week's gonna be a pretty big Vic
Yeah.
episode based on the teaser that we got. So I'm excited to dive into a little bit more. I mean, it's doing a great job of planting the seeds for all of these characters to sort of get their flowers, and he's sort of the last domino to fall. I would not be surprised if episode 4 is a little more Sophia heavy just to like help knock over that final domino, but then we have all of our pieces in place and we can sort of see where we're going to go from
Yeah.
there. But in terms of Vic this episode, obviously he's learning firsthand what it's like to work for Oz and the ramifications that you alluded to, the grave scene, and we really are starting to see his stutter come through in nervousness and situations. He got that text. I think it's from like Graciela is I think the name. It's something
Mhm.
similar to that, and like we've seen her in the
Yeah.
teasers. Obviously, learning more about him being from a part of Gotham that seems to have been just completely wiped out in the
Mhm.
floods. Another Riddler mentioned
Yeah.
this episode too, like seeing those ramifications continue to be really present. We were talking a little bit about it before the show that like it sounds like and feels like we're probably, I don't know, somewhere around mid-November at this
Mhm.
point. Probably could get a Thanksgiving episode, which would be
Yeah.
crazy.
I mean,
Just
we
like
know
Thanksgiving with the
that we
Falcons.
don't get past, or we don't get to Christmas in this because
Do we
yeah,
know
Matt
that?
Reeves has said that before because he was talking about the show takes a couple weeks. He said so we're obviously post Halloween, or we're in November when it starts, obviously because of the Batman. But yeah, he said that it doesn't get through Christmas. It ends like before. I'm
Interesting.
pretty sure. I'll look it up to confirm. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll find out. But, seeing more about, what Vic is going through and how he's experiencing these things is really interesting. And, you talked about sort of feeling sympathetic towards Sophia. I went to make a joke earlier that maybe we should be locking you up in Arkham because I don't feel that way at all currently. I get what you're saying, but I'm also like, this is a bad person. But Vic, I'm definitely
Oh, I
like,
feel so bad for that kid.
oh man, this
He's gonna do some
dude's
fucking
getting roped up in
terrible
the
things,
past.
and
Yeah. Or something really bad's gonna happen to him.
I feel like the really bad thing that's gonna happen
And
to
it's
him is that he's gonna do terrible things. I feel like he's
fair.
gonna survive this.
Yeah, that's a good point. He may just be sort of our lens through the other side and what happens. And we'll see, but whether it's like he's not really that interested in hooking up with the girl that Oz sets him up with, or obviously he fails his objective this episode and get finds the ramifications of that. We're learning so much about who he is as a character and who he is as a person, and I know we're going to dive into that a ton next week as we approach his more involved episode for sure.
Yeah, no,
What'd you find on Matt Reeves? Did you
yeah.
figure
So
it
he
out?
said, "quote: The Penguin story plays out over the next weeks that take you toward the end of the year. We don't play Christmas or New Year's, but we're getting there." So
Cool.
yeah, does not.
Christmas movie for
Yeah, I
Batman.
think 100%. That's definitely what's happening. But I do. I think because we were arguing, like you said, we were arguing about this before we went live. But I think it's November. I think that this episode is like November 15th, maybe the 16th, because on Alberto's crypt stone it says he died on the 13th, and I think that this has been like max 2 days since then. Because also you have
I'm more in like the 4 to 5 days, but
well
I hear you. So like we're not that far
they
off
haven't
either
gotten the
way.
shipment that he talked about, and that was coming within like 4 days, I think 4 or 5 days, right? Something like that.
These are some good
So
points.
like,
Making some strong
and this
arguments.
entire episode took place in like 12 hours. Like it did not, like it
Sure.
was just the night, and or I guess like almost 24 hours because it was like the night before and then the
Yeah.
funeral memorial. But yeah, so we're straight mid-November.
So yeah, that makes sense. So outside of that, there's obviously everything going on with Johnny Vitti, played by Michael Kelly. We learned the origin of the picture, kind of the reason why Carmine had the images of him. He was sleeping or is sleeping
Yeah.
with Luca Falcone's wife, who is now the head of the
Mhm.
family. I believe that's Carmine's
Yes.
brother and Sophia's uncle. And so he's up to no good. Oz is going to try to pin this whole thing on him. We'll see how that develops now that Castillo has taken some of the fall for Alberto's death. I still think it'll be Oz's plan to pin Vitti as like the mastermind behind the whole thing.
Yeah, because he wants him gone.
And we'll see what happens there. Yeah, for sure. And the third guy who like they're not making a big enough deal about the third guy. I think his name is Milos Grappa is what I'm finding here on my cheat sheet, but they're not making a big huff and puff about him. So I feel like this is
Vitti's
really
like
going to be about
assistant.
Oz and Vitti.
That's what he seems like.
Yeah, or like he seems also more like a third party of the family for
like
sure.
An accountant or some shit.
Yeah, like whatever he is, and like the show's doing a good job of telling you who's important and who isn't, and so we'll find out what happens there. But it's clear that Lauren and the team are setting up Penguin versus Vitti, and then maybe needing to cross Luca and Sophia Falcone off of those lists as well. So we'll see what happens there. Is there anything else from the episode that I missed that you wanted to sort of flag?
I don't think so. I think that covers most of it. I just think it's a really impressive thing, speaking about all the family members that the show is able to get all of the relations and everything across as well as it does, where you're like, oh, okay, I know who this person is, who they're related to, all that stuff. Because these are definitely these are big families, and it's all really like important and intricate. So it's always impressive when a show I think is able to do that. But yeah, I think those are most of the main points. So after the break, we're going to be speculating a bit on what's next for season 1. We'll be right back.
Hey, Aspect listener, I'm Robbie.
And I'm Alex, enjoying the show here on the Aspect Network.
Then check out Framing the Force.
We are your one-stop shop for all things in a galaxy far, far away. Each week, we discuss everything from the latest news and releases to the hottest topics in the fandom.
Beyond the films and series, we share our thoughts on every corner of the Star Wars universe, from comics to video games to collectibles and everything in between.
Join us every week as we discuss one of the greatest franchises in film history here on the Aspect Network.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to The Aspect Reacts. Before the break, we discussed some of our favorite moments from tonight's episode of The Penguin. To cap off this episode, we wanted to discuss what we think is in store for the rest of the season. Sean, where do you think we're going from here?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it ahead of the break, but I think we know that next episode's going to be really about Vic and learning about him and some of his relationships and what was going on. I had to go back when he looked at the
I
flag
did
pole
also
or
go
the
back and
power
pause it. I was
pole.
like, are any of these people
'Cause I was like,
someone I know?
I was like, what is going on? Like, and I was like, what did they want us to see here? And I think the general idea is really just what we had already talked about, which is his section of Gotham, which I believe is Crown
Point,
City. Is
I
that
think.
what it was? Crown Point. Crown Point. That
I think
makes
that's
more
what it
sense. That sounds right. Crown Point, like, seemingly has been like wiped
Yeah.
out
Which I did.
as a result
I
of the
saw
flood.
that just reminded me. I saw it was a meme the other day, but it was of the Riddler, and it was like him being like, "Screw the 1%," and then like floods all like under the like low income neighborhoods, like those floods nothing but that. And I was like, "Oh, that's a good point. Good job, Riddler."
Poor Riddler. And like not poor Riddler, but he succeeded in his own way. But continuing to see the threads that are being connected and what is sort of next for him and Vic and learning about where his character come from, who he's lost as a result of the Riddler and the floods. You know, some possibly a love interest for him that I think's been teased in some of the trailers and some of the other things that we've seen coming out of the show, and continuing to build upon all of these relationships, right? Like, I think VD still needs to go down. We're gonna keep learning about Sophia and now her partnership with Oz. At what point is he going to have to double cross her, or she's going to get the upper hand on him? Like, all of that still needs to be figured out too, because we've talked about it a little bit, and like we should probably recircle this conversation every week. Is it's like, do we feel like he's going to end this season like as the kingpin of Gotham, or is he not? And like, I continue to still kind of lean to a position where like everything this show seems to be telling us about his character is that he is going to find a way to survive, but also make crucial mistakes that is not going to allow him to like get to his end goal. But where do you sort of think it goes from here? And like, do you still feel like we're gonna see him as the kingpin of Gotham by the end of this?
I do think that we are going to see him as the kingpin of Gotham by the end of this. I think I'm getting more sure of that. Going from here, yeah, I mean, we have to see obviously Johnny like everyone go down at that point essentially, if that's what's like happening by the end of this. Yeah, I think I'm super excited to see more of the exploration with Vic. Obviously, as you said, like I think it's a really strong point of the show that they are making the flood and the impact that had on Gotham such a one pivotal part of it, but then also grounding it in the character like through Vic. I think is the best way to do it. And so I'm excited to see that get explored more. That obviously then of course makes more sense as to why we had seen in previous teasers and stuff like a ton of the flood and different angles of that. So that'll be interesting, I think. I really can't wait to see the stuff with Sophia and Arkham eventually. I think what you said earlier about next week being more Vic and then probably getting Sophia like her episode like that in season 4, I think would make sense. I have a question for you actually. Do you think that Sophia believes Oz at all? Like, do you know?
Well, That's
Because
a good
I'm like,
question.
I want to
I
be like,
guess
no, like, there's no way. But I also, she's so good in this role. I don't know. Like,
yeah. That's a good question. I mean, certainly at the start of this episode,
no,
I would have
yeah.
said no. And like arguably up until the knife gets planted, I would say she doesn't trust
Hmm.
Oz. And I think his plan works.
Yeah.
But she's totally gonna find out at some
Yeah.
point.
I mean, that
And
has
he's
to blow up,
screwed.
right? Yeah, of course.
Like that's totally gonna happen. And like I don't find the show to be
Mm-mm.
predictable at all. Like it's really executing on a lot, but it's also good writing to where like you can clearly see where it's gonna
Hmm.
go, right? Like planting that seed that, you know, Oz has lied about his mother's death and, Vic being sort of a loose wild card and, you know, uncommitted to the job and, Sophia and her craziness. And his love interest and her girls. Like there's certainly it certainly seems like the show is setting up this idea that like at some point later this season Sophia is going to have everyone and everything that is important to Oz like under her fingers and like at her blade, and Oz and probably Vic with him will probably need to find a way to rescue all of these people and like stop Sophia, and not in like a cheesy comic book way, just in a like really enthralling like crime drama
Hmm.
way. And it'll be interesting to see, but like I don't know when or how it's going to happen, but probably Maroney
Yeah.
probably finding a way to like double cross Oz. And we didn't talk much about him this episode and their family. And I love what they set up in the Inside Gotham of just like explaining his relationship with his wife. And, she's going to continue to play a pivotal role in this, this season. And I love this idea of, the Persian and Italian mobs kind of combining and being what the Maronis are. Like there's so much excellent world building that they're sort of dropping through and explaining in the Inside Gotham
Mhm.
section. But that was a long-winded answer to just be like, I do think she knows or believes him
Yeah.
currently, but she's gonna find out at some point. It's gonna be a
Yeah, I think that
disaster.
that tracks. I would probably agree with that. For Maroney, I also on his character, I think that I thought it was hilarious and really accurate that in the inside the Gotham thing, he was saying that Maroney's easily manipulated, which I just think is like a hilarious character trait of his. That like he obviously knows that something like Oz is playing an angle here, but he's just the type of person who's like can't quite see it, and so still is able to be used in that way. And I like the idea that and obviously, I mean, we've seen like that's the whole reason he's in prison, right? Like he got outmaneuvered by the Falcons. He didn't see whatever coming,
Yeah.
and that's why he's in the spot that he is. And so I like the idea that before that, the reason that he was in the like power position that he was mostly just because of brute force and like by being the Maronis.
Sure.
Um, so again, it's just another small thing that they're able to do that really expands the characters a lot. Um, but yeah, it's just great stuff.
Yeah, and like circling back on some other stuff we speculated on last week, like, do we think he's gonna get out at some point? I actually feel less strongly about that after this episode. Like it feels like he's certainly got enough players on the outside and like it is not crucial to Oz's plan to
Maroney,
get Maroney out at some
yeah,
point. But also we teased that like because of what happened in the Batman, like there's a chance that he's going to just get exonerated anyway. Like that is a whole other element. Like it may not even be a necessary tool for Oz, but like it may happen by what Matt Reeves had set up in the first
yeah,
film.
yeah. I don't know honestly. And I also think that it's one such like functional writing, but the fact that like narratively it does so much to have him sequestered. Like the fact that he can't directly interact with Oz and the Falcons. I mean, obviously he has a conversations with Oz, but like outside of those specific conversations, like he has no way of directly influencing the things that are happening, and that's such a that hurts him so much, and is something that allows Oz and the Falcons to operate in the way they do. And so, yeah, I don't know. I agree. I was previously more convinced that we would see him out of Blackgate by via either exoneration or breakout. But yeah, I'm not entirely convinced now that we'll get there. Um,
Yeah, and here's a good question for you because you're a sucker for this
mhm.
type of thing. Is there a world now where you feel like, at least for this season, it feels this way, but like generally, like we're in a bit of a Tenet situation where like the wife is running the
Mm.
empire and like Maroni's just sort of a figurehead.
It
I
kind of
was
does feel
I was
like
thinking
that.
about that when I was watching this episode. I was kind of watching and thinking about that as I was
And
watching
that
this
also would
episode.
play into another big thing of this theme of this episode we shouldn't even really talk about, but the fact that Sophia facing aside from the fact that she's a murderer and like deals with all of that like criticism, like she's walking into a room and Lauren LaFranc makes a point of it that like it's dripping with misogyny, like the entire obviously everything to do with the mafia and the mob and all of that, and that's one of the things that she's combating. And so yeah, that point reminded me of the fact that in Tenet, whenever Priya is like, it does a lot to have a man's face like in this world, like leading the thing. So yeah, I do definitely kind of I can feel that from this, and especially in the sense that that does add more and makes more to the fact that like Maroni's kind of dumb and gets manipulated really easily in the way that he's been able to be in the position that he is because his wife is a little bit smarter and like figures things out. And honestly, if she was real close to like solving the problem like in 2 seconds, right? And then Oz is able to weasel his way out of it again.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, and like I think we'll continue to see how that relationship develops and like what that looks like. But I certainly think we're onto something there, and um, we're not going to do it as much week to week. But I can't help but spend some of the time speculating on some Batman 2 stuff. So like we know that an image got circulated around today about kind of snow in the Penguin. It was a teaser from something.
I don't know what.
It wasn't from the
I
teaser
don't
at the
know
end of
where it
this
came from.
episode, but it came out. Snow is coming at some point here. We know that as we're pushing into winter, and that's going to be really exciting. But also we get a few, small name drops here. Like they're talking about kind of how, Mayor-elect Reyes, is it? Yeah, it's
Real.
Rhea.
Yeah.
Real. Oh, right. Real change. That's what it was. I was like trying to think of her campaign poster. How she's clearly struggling to handle all of this, and they're talking about that element. Like obviously he's not in the story because it's not his story, but like is Bruce around, like, or like is the Batman around, or like is he elsewhere right now? Like are we dealing with a like Dark Knight to Dark Knight Rises situation where like he is not present for whatever reason? Like obviously I understand the narrative reason like why we're not bringing up the Batman every week, and like why in the show they're like, because it's just like this looming presence that everyone would expect to show up if they're talking about him. But like I do wonder if there is something to like, as a result of the floods, obviously he's trying to be this beacon of hope, but because it seems like we're dealing with a really short turnaround between the first film and the second film, and the Penguin sort of filling this gap in between, I think you could logically understand that, I don't know, maybe something's going on with Bruce and he's not as present during these few weeks, between films, like, and he's going to sort of come back, in the second one after not being present after the flood directly.
Yeah, so I do think I actually might have a satisfying answer for this. I can't remember all of the details because it has been a while since I read them, and I read both Nightfall and No Man's Land back to back in like a month, so they're a little bit of a blur because that is a lot of issues of comics. But one, No Man's Land straight up name dropped in this episode. They literally call Crown Point a No Man's Land, which is obviously very intentional, but. Also related, at the start of No Man's Land, Batman is MIA for a while. That's one of the big plot points in it, that like Batman's not doing shit to help, essentially. And people are like, where's Batman? He's like abandoned Gotham, et cetera, et cetera. So it does kind of feel like Reeves and Co and Lauren are very much setting up the idea that Batman isn't around right now and things are just getting worse. And I don't know how much they'll lean into directly doing No Man's Land in the Batman Part 2. But it is definitely a stage that has been set, and there are some strong similarities, I think, there. I don't remember why he, like, because obviously whenever he does come back and show up in No Man's Land, like he explains it, and I straight up don't remember what the reasoning is right now. But
because I mean, I think about the end of the Batman 2, and it's just
Batman
the
also.
Batman, also, and like, obviously Catwoman's leaving and then he seems to be driving back to Gotham. And the whole point is like now he's a beacon of hope for the
Mhm.
city. And like it would be really interesting if for whatever reason that isn't panning out the way that he wanted it to, or like he's having a difficult time accepting that role. And like that's sort of where we find him. Um, we could talk about Batman 2 all
Building his
day. I
new
like almost started a whole other thread of narrative that we could talk about that I was really curious about your thoughts on, but let's save it there. Is there anything else you want to talk about Penguin specific before we wrap up the show?
No, I don't think so. I think that covers it. Everyone's
Okay.
fantastic though. Good show.
Yeah, no, great show. We'll be back next week to talk about it. And so thank you everybody for tuning in to episode 2 of The Aspect Reacts The Penguin. Alex, where can people find you
can
online?
find me online at the Alex Batts. It's BATTS on both Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Please be sure to subscribe here to The Aspect on YouTube and any platform where podcasts are found. Follow us on Twitter/X, Instagram, and TikTok at The Aspect Co. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.